Good morning and welcome to Behind the Screen. I am JM. We're going to be trying something a little new with some audio. Let's see how it works. I know Bob will be in the chat letting me know how my new mic sounds. This is Behind the Screen. Welcome. It's a show where we just take 20, 30 minutes, step behind the GM screen, look at game design, inspiration, do game reviews, talk about things that as GMs, DMs, storytellers, game designers, we like to talk about. Maybe give you some advice on from my perspective, and just I've got a lot of years chatting about things like this. Hello, Professor, always good to see you. Yes, fine Corinthian leather. If you did not check it out, we did have we launched a brand new show last night. We did our first episode of our Deadlands stream, the horror at Headstone Hill. It went great. Started off with a bang, literally, and then the group got deep into the mystery. Check us out on Monday nights at 7:30. I know Pinnacle is hosting us for that show. We're going to be doing about 11 to 12 more sessions of Deadlands on our channel. We're really excited to be running that game. I'm excited to be running that game. We've got a great group. Our producer, the wonderful and tireless JD, is in that game, as well as the Mr. Bob Crumb. And Rook is there as well, and our good friend Lily. So one of the neat things and experiences for me about Behind the Screen is it's caused me to really shift and look at things that help my design process. It's interesting. As you do a show like this, you start thinking back on what were your influences, what put this in your mind, what put that in your mind. And one thing that I really love, Padre, good to see you. Restar, good to see you as well. And Rook, yes, it was a great session, and hopefully you guys all enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to that. I am trying the new mic setup. Bob, let me know what your thoughts are on the dulcet tones of my voice with this mic. So one of the things I noticed as I was planning and prepping and looking at my games is I tend to run a lot of gritty urban fantasy. Whether that's in Tanar, the city of Mosenball, but the main one being Shadow's Reach, this city that is ruled by 7 perverse gods, and there's crime and there's intrigue. The fact that we're setting our Torg game in Istanbul and we're digging into the city. And this new Pathfinder 2 idea that I have about a mad god meme rising up from the depths. I notice again and again my Zweihander games, all of these games come back to a very urban fantasy style of play. And I don't mean urban fantasy in sort of the modern sort of Harry Dresden, Laura K. Hamilton sort of vibe. But the voices are in your mind, Ben? Well, that's good to hear. Glad to hear it sounds better, Bob. But urban fantasy is my fantasy games always tend to take place in an urban environment. Yes, I'm running a D&D game that's going off all through the wild. Yes, I've run a lot of dungeon crawls. But somehow it always comes back to the city for me. And I was thinking about why this is, and it really comes down to this book from 1979, the first of a series, of which up until recently I'd only read the first 2. I'm now making my way through the rest of the 12. This strange, eclectic little book called Thieves World. So, introduction to Thieves World. Was edited by Robert Asprin and Lynn Abbey, and it is I don't want to say a mosaic book, because that's really something more along the lines of Wild Cards, where all of the stories were submitted and they were edited to fit together sort of seamlessly. But Thieves World was a world, a city, the city of Sanctuary, that was established by a number of authors, and then everybody could write in it. They could take up other people's characters. They could tell stories from different points of view. And the editors would say, hey, here's what's going on in the city, and then people could write. And as you look at just this first one, I mean, Robert Asprin, obviously, of the Myth series, Lynn Abbey. Paul Anderson is in this one. Andrew Offutt. Marion Zimmer Bradley is in the first book. And as you go through, David Drake, Philip Jose Farmer, Janet Morris. And as you just keep reading through this, the names and the luminaries of our modern fantasy, some of them, I don't want to say cut their teeth here, but I was introduced to them for the first time. C.J. Serrera. These are a series of books set in a world called Thieves World, the known world, if you will. Sanctuary is the city that this all takes place in. There are no heroes. There are some people who do good things, and in the next story they do bad things. There are some people who have both virtues and vices. It was my first introduction to sort of this, I won't say grimdark, because it's not grimdark. Grimdark is its own thing, and we can have a discussion on grimdark, and possibly also why 40K isn't grimdark, even though that's where the name of it comes from. But it's gritty. It's human. Now, some of the stories are better than others. Some of the authors are better than others. But overall, each of the short stories in these books are on average of an above quality compared to a lot of the other things I was reading at the time. Yeah, Padre, so you read the first one a while ago. It's great. And there are 12 in the main sequence. And then Lynn Abbey came and wrote a novel called Sanctuary that bridges the first 12 to the I think 14 and 15. So 13, 14, and 15 are kind of the next generation. Yeah, David Drake did a story in this as well. Like these are sort of luminaries of the 80s and 90s fantasy sci-fi genre. I mean, Philip Jose Farmer was a great pull in Tales of the Vulgar Unicorn. So what was interesting to me is, let's talk about game design, because I draw a lot of inspiration from these books. Couple of things. One, the editors are always very clear. There are no discrepancies. If you see a discrepancy, you're not actually seeing a discrepancy. What you're seeing is people's faulty memory. There are unreliable narrators in Sanctuary. The more and more that we see the stories unfold, they get told from different point of views, and no one's point of view is ever the same as anyone else's. People's memories sort of falter. They embellish their part of the story while playing down other people's. This is key in gaming. There are times where you may misremember something as a player or as a GM. You don't need to correct it. We talk about this in the Grand Campaign, the continuity, the canon, if you will. It is an oral and a memory-based tale. And so maybe the discrepancy that one NPC says about something isn't a discrepancy. Either they're trying to hide something, which is usually your player's first go-to lead. But the other thing is they're human. They may be making a mistake. Another key part of Thieves World for me was this. This was the Chaosium Thieves World box set. And as I was looking over this for the review, it is not as detailed or as crunchy as I remember it. Additional materials here by Paul Anderson, Steve Perrin, Greg Stafford, people who were involved in Chaosium. What was cool about this is this came out with stats for AD&D, Chivalry and Sorcery, Dragon Quest, regular D&D, Adventures in Fantasy, The Fantasy Trip, RuneQuest Traveler, and Tunnels and Trolls. It was great because as opposed to giving you what we consider a modern setting where we're going to say, hey, this building has these NPCs and this thing in it. What it did was it gave you by district just a ton of random encounter tables. So you got the feeling of the world without being told what the world is. It's another thing that I picked up design-wise. For me, it's far more important to get the feeling right as opposed to the details. If I'm running a game in the Zaharets, I want to convey the sense of the city of Amina Nowani. I want them to know what kind of encounters they're going to have on the streets, what kind of celebrations are going on, what kind of fights are breaking out. I don't need to detail every stall that every merchant has. One of the coolest encounters in this that I continually use is the Funeral Procession. Who died? Who's mourning? Who's happy? That is a great background to just drop into any scene. And another thing, children. So often in games, we forget to include the fact that there would be and there should be in a city or a village or a town. Most of the time we're focusing on the NPCs the players are going to interact with. But what are the children doing? That single detail adds so much verisimilitude to your games because it reminds people, hey, there is more life going on here than just the quest that I am on. Bob, I could see you wrestling under the name the Vulgar Unicorn, and I could see you wrestling Hellboy in a luchador contest under the name the Vulgar Unicorn. Yes, bathrooms, Bob. Maybe not in the dungeon. Just remember that everyone. What's the title of that book? Everybody poops. The last thing that really inspires me and continues to inspire me to this day. So the reason Robert Aspin wrote these books, according to his Making of Thieves World essay here at the back, I'm going to paraphrase, is the fact that most people have to write trilogies because you have to spend a third of the story setting up your world and a third of the story setting up your characters, and then you can finally tell the plot. So when you mix those all up, you get kind of a good 3-book arc. He was tired of that. He didn't want people to have to spend this great mental load getting their story rolling. So he and a number of other like great science fiction writers, Lynn Abbey, let me see if I can see here real quick. I mean, they had people who were doing each of the details. One author took the gods, one author took the coinage, and essentially they shared the load to create Sanctuary, and they turned their authors free. In an essay that Lynn Abbey wrote, I think for the Green Ronin books, she describes Thieves World as D&D for authors. This influenced me long before I read John Wick's Play Dirty, where he reinforced this idea. Don't feel like every time your players ask you for an NPC, you have to be the one to answer it. If Bob in the Deadlands game says, hey, I'm looking for a gambler down on his luck, where can I find one? I'll say, well, hey, where would you think you could find one? Which saloon would you go to? Okay, what does this guy look like? Like, to you, to your character's eye, what does this character look like? You, as the GM, have so much input into the world design, but you don't have to. You can offload some of these things to your players. We do this in 13th Age a lot. With the montage scenes, the NPC montage scenes, the investigative montage scenes. That all comes back to Thieves World for me. The roots of these ideas that I have been playing with come from this. Where one author would write a story and another author would be like, man, that secondary character is awesome. I want to write a story about them. Oh, yes. Yes, Professor. I think anyone can GM, even if you've never really played before. I started GMing before I had ever played before. The thing is, 90% of people, myself included, when you start off, you are going to be a bad DM or GM. And that's okay. Because none of your players, if you get a group of friends who have never played before, are going to know. The goal is to get better every session. Man, I think back at some of my original games that I ran, and they are just awful, and I'm embarrassed of them. I've actually apologized to some of my players for some of my very first forays out into gaming. But the key is, find something you like and that you're passionate about, And that passion will carry you through all of the rough spots. I remember the first time I played a game with Richard and Ben. We were playing when we started our first campaign, Numenera. There was a point where Richard was like, "How did you know what was down that hallway?" And I just smiled. And I didn't know. I just kind of was coming up with it as it was going along. But that's the key. You are Oz the Great and Powerful. It's all smoke and mirrors. It's all fun and games. And just make sure they don't peer behind the curtain. That would be my advice. Also, another advice, if you want to run a game and you like D&D, go check out Matt Colville's You Can Start Running D&D Now section at the start of his channel, because those are the best advice on getting a dungeon and getting your players out into the game. If you can do a good accent, you are fine. But you, again, don't need the accents. I realize that sometimes, especially in today's day and age, we have a plethora, an abundance of really great GMs and DMs that you can go watch online. Guy at How to Be a Great GM, Matt Mercer, Matt Colville, the guy at Dimension 20. These are all great DMs and GMs to watch. But the other thing to remember with most of these people, they have put in the 10,000 hours required to be an expert. Whether that's an expert at DMing, GMing, or voice acting, or being a professional actor, or being a professional comedian, they have put in the front load of the work that you don't see. What you're seeing is the tip of the iceberg. That's not a bad thing. Be inspired. Try new things. But also realize you don't have to be Matt Mercer. You don't have to be Matt Colville. Heck, you don't even have to be me. When we start running, we don't go, oh, I can't be Bolt, so why am I even bothering running? There is joy in the journey, and there is joy in the experience. And yes, you may never be the fastest person alive, but you shouldn't compare yourself to somebody who has already put the 10,000 hours in to be an expert. You need to compare yourself only against yourself and who you were yesterday. As long as you're better than the day before, you're fine. And to quote Jor-El, sometimes you will stumble and fall, but eventually you'll join us all in the light. I really just watched Man of Steel last night, and I still love that movie. You can fight me on that. But JD, I know you will fight me on that, but I loved it. So, there we go. So yeah, Thieves World, offload some of this stuff to your players. And if you're feeling incredibly brave, let go of some of that control. It's what Robert Asper and Lynn Abbey did. They came up with this cool thing, and they let go of it, and they let it go out into the world. Greg Stafford discovered Glorantha, and then he let the reins go. Let other people play and explore in his sandbox. If you have a player who wants to, who really takes a shine to an NPC or creates an NPC, whether it's with a Benny or a possibility, or because you pushed back on them and offloaded some of that, consider giving them the control of that NPC. Be like, cool, every time Bob is going to talk with, or anytime anybody in the group is going to talk with the down-and-out gambler, I'm going to make Lily play him. Let's see what happens. Maybe I give, the 3x5 index card is the GM's #1 go-to tool in my book. Write down just a couple of details about the NPC. Maybe some secrets that they know. Give some of that to the player to let them know how to, when and how to reveal it, and then let them run wild. You will be amazed at the directions your story goes. Because again, the NPCs that you love may not be the NPCs that your players love. And giving them the ability to play additional characters in your campaign and kind of own part of it, when I have been able to do that, it has been a wonderful experience for everyone at the table. So, Thieves World. Sort of hard to find. I got my copy for like $1.20 at Half Price Books. But you can get, I believe they're available on Kindle. If they are, I will put them on, put them in the links to Amazon. The first book is amazing, and they do get better. If you've never read a multi-author book, this book is wonderful. All of the stories are only about 30 to 40 pages. They're short stories, and they sort of build the world and your understanding of it sort of piece by piece as you discover new characters. Again, Thieves World was sort of ahead of its time. You had mages who were pretending to be things they weren't so they could hide secrets. You had this sort of kind of coming out of the Conan and the Lankmar kind of feel, this more down and dirty murder in the streets kind of fantasy. But yet, there's a lot of magic. A lot of people want to talk about Thieves World as low magic, but honestly, as you start looking through this, there are ruins and there are potions and there are always mages around when you need them, and there are the Sedanzo who can tell your future, and there are the Adepts of the Blue Star, these specific group of mages who practice and refine their power so that they can battle the face of chaos on the last day and hopefully save the world. You have characters like Tempest who can't die because they're the incarnation of one of the gods, walking through the mortal realms, basically doing whatever they want until their god souljacks their body. If you like Lankmar, Conan, if you want to see, this picture, I don't know, I should have pulled a picture for this, but this picture on the front with the mage with the big sword, you couldn't do that when I started playing D&D, right? That was a no-no. Like, you could do it in GURPS, which is where we kind of started in Palladium Fantasy, but like by the time I found Thieves World, I was kind of steeped in that D&D mindset. It's awesome. You have this mage with a sword. So, Thieves World, great inspiration, deeply influenced my game design and my GM style. If you want something that's fun, that's gritty, without being grimdark, you do get happy endings in Thieves World, at least by book. And if you get an unhappy ending, read a couple of more books, and maybe you'll find that that character's fortunes has changed. So, oh man, Professor, I love GURPS. Love GURPS. The first game I truly ran was a GURPS game. Tanar, the previous world before Tanar that got blowed up, was a GURPS game, GURPS-based game. There was always this fun challenge of pulling any two 3rd edition GURPS books off the shelf, mashing them up, and coming up with a new setting. Ben, maybe that's how we come up with our new Chaosium for Tor. We just randomly pull GURPS books off the shelf. Maybe the Bunnies and Burrows and the post-apocalyptic magic setting. That would be a great Chaosium for Tor. So, that has been this episode of Behind the Screen. This leads into our next episode on Thursday that we're going to be talking about, which is one of my favorite techniques to convey horror in a game. And that's of the unreliable narrator, which, again, for me, between Thieves World and Gene Wolfe's Books of the New Sun, the unreliable narrator becomes a key component in how I run horror games. And that's what we're going to talk about on Thursday. So, check out all the other great shows that we have on the Iconic Production channel. We have Behind the Screen twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursday mornings. Third weekend of the month, we have Exploring Glorantha on Saturday morning, and then the Iconic Podcast on Sunday night. This month's Iconic Podcast on the 19th, we're going to be playing through a Trail of Cthulhu adventure written by our very own Becca, and we're going to see how that kind of comes up and comes out. And the fourth Saturday of the month, we do our grand campaign. We're going to be continuing our discussion of resources, and we have our 2 standing actual plays. On Monday nights, we do the Savage Worlds Deadlands Horror at Headstone Hill, and 2/3 or 3/4 of the cast is in the chat today, so it's awesome. And on Tuesday nights, we do our FET 5 Istanbul game for Torg eternity. Tonight, we're actually having an interlude session where we just talk with the cast. I've got some questions prepared. We're going to sit back, relax. We're going to have a drink and talk about Torg Eternity, the campaign, and what the players' experiences have been with it so far. If you want to jump on and ask a question of the chat, you are more than welcome to. So that has been it for Behind the Screen. If you like what we do, please consider following here on Twitch. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, the like button, let the algorithm know, hey, this is fun content that other people should look at. And if you want to join the Iconic Production community, please jump over to patreon.com/iconic production. You get access to our Discord server. You get to talk with the chat. They're way cooler than I am. And we discuss topics for Behind the Screen. We discuss all of the shows, all of the cast members are on there, and it is always a good time. So until Thursday, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming. I am JM. This has been episode 35, which is hard to believe, of Behind the Screen, and I will see you all in 2 days. Have a good one.